So for today's Cook With Me, we're going to be taking a look at Minimalist Baker's Mushroom and Leek Risotto. I've made this recipe 2 times now, so this will be the 3rd time. I've given it to non-vegans before, and I've actually had someone request me make this for them, and they're not vegan. Like, it's that good. Scrolling down to the recipe, there are some changes that I make. Just because I follow recipes roughly, but not like too exact, I guess. So the first one is that I don't measure out the mushrooms. I just use a 227 gram pack of mushrooms, which I think is actually 8 ounces, so that works. And just regular like cremini. And I do not use 2 tablespoons of olive oil. I use less than that. I do not use white wine. I do sub it for the vegetable broth, and I use Daya cheddar instead of the Parmesan cheese. No parsley to top. So I guess you can say this is a spin on her recipe and not an accurate representation of it, but it's good either way. So let's begin. So first things first, you're going to need 2 pots. The one at the back is the one that I'm going to use to heat the vegetable broth, and the Dutch oven I'm going to use to actually cook down the mushrooms and the risotto itself. So let's start by adding 4 cups of water to the pot at the back. You can also use boxed vegetable broth. Personally, I use bouillon cubes. The brand of bouillon I use specifically is the Aurora vegetable mix, and that's just because it's 97 cents for 6 things, and it's really good. So either that, or I would use like the Knorr, but I prefer these because these are cheaper. So we're going to begin by adding 4 cups of water to the back. And here's the second 2. Then we're going to unwrap our bouillon and drop it in. As this boils, it's going to end up breaking down the cube, but I will stir it as needed as well. So the first thing I'm going to do is cut up my cremini mushrooms. And like I said, I use a package that is 227 grams, just your average Walmart brand, your Fresh Market cremini. Alright, I've given my mushrooms a wash, so now I'm ready to start cutting. You're just going to want to slice these into, slices. The first time I made these, I actually just used the sliced creminis, the pre-sliced ones, just because it was easier and it was the first time making it and I needed sliced mushrooms, and that's just what I happen to have on hand. So I just do like a general thin slice. Mushrooms cook down quite well when they are on the heat. They release a lot of moisture, so do not worry if the chunks end up being bigger than you would want in a finished meal, because they will cook down and it will be good. Now that I have my mushrooms cut up, we're going to add it with some olive oil to the Dutch oven. Like I said, I don't use the full 2 tablespoons of olive oil. I literally just add a little bit because the Dutch oven's pretty good at being a non-stick surface anyways, and I don't like consuming that much oil because 2 tablespoons is a lot. So now you're going to want to add your chopped mushrooms. I have my Dutch oven at about 5 on the burner, and that should be fine. It's not hot yet, it's warm but not hot, so I'm gonna let it do its thing while we are cutting up the leeks. I also choose to use a silicone spatula. This is specifically the Pillsbury silicone spatula, and that's just because it's non-stick, non-scented. It won't ruin the Dutch oven or anything like that. It won't ruin a non-stick pan. So this is what I use for cooking. Wood would also be good. It's going to give that a little bit of stir to coat in the oil, and then I'm gonna let it do its thing while we cut up the leeks. So when you're working with leeks, you don't want to use the whole thing. The green part at the end of the leeks is very bitter, it's very tough. You want to stick to basically the white part. So I'm going to cut this about here and then cut off the ends. This recipe calls for 3/4 of a cup of leeks. I usually use 2, but this leek is huge. Like, this is as big as my knife. So I'm just going to use 1, and if it's a little extra leaky, it's not a big deal. So we're going to cut these up same as before, just thin slices. You will probably find dirt in between the layers of the leeks, and that's just because it grows in dirt. So at the end, I always like to give them a wash, just like shake them down under water. And that should clear that up. If not, a little bit of dirt's not going to hurt anyone. Alright, so now that my leeks are done and cut up, we're going to check on the mushrooms. As you can see, our mushrooms have reduced in size substantially, so now you are ready to move them to a bowl. Alright, we're going to add a little bit more olive oil, and then we're going to add our leeks. Turn this down because the temperature is just a little bit too high, so I'm going to put it on like a medium-low heat. But you just want these to get soft. It's going to pick up the fond from the bottom, and everything's going to kind of mingle together, and it's going to end up tasting really good. Alright, so now that our leeks have some color to them, we are going to add our rice. Notice how the bottom of the Dutch oven is completely clean now, or almost completely clean. The leeks have picked up all of the good juices that have been sitting on the bottom from the mushrooms, and now they're all getting incorporated. So the rice I'll be using for this recipe is the Unico Super Fino Arborio rice. This is pretty standard. I've used sushi rice before. Just as long as it's a short grain rice, it doesn't really matter. And the sushi rice worked really well. I was just out of it and the store was out of it, so we're going to try like the actual proper rice this time. Alright, so this recipe calls for 1 cup of rice, which I'm going to add in with the leeks. Now I'm going to stir this around. You have to let the rice cook on its own with the leeks for a minute or so, and then later we'll start adding in the liquid. Now that our rice has been cooking for about a minute, as you can see we're starting to get fond on the bottom again, you're going to want to grab a ladle and start ladling the broth from the pot at the back, 1 ladle at a time, into the rice. Gonna sizzle, that's okay. You just want to mix the rice around, make sure everything's incorporated. You're going to notice that the liquid's going to get dried up very, very quickly. And when it does get dried up, just add another ladleful. See, our liquid's almost dry already again. So I'm going to add another ladle. And I'm going to mix it again. You want to make sure you're continually moving the rice because you don't ever want it to be simmering or boiling. It's only at about 3 on the burner right now, so it's not very high at all. It's still at a low heat, but we don't want it to actually be bubbling or anything. We just want to keep moving it around, not letting the rice burn, but just incorporating all of those flavors from the leeks and the broth and the fond from the mushrooms. Keep adding in ladles all the way until your pot is empty, or until the pot of broth is empty. And at that point, the rice should be cooked. Of course, do a taste test just because you don't want to serve someone uncooked rice, but in that case, you can add a little bit more broth, but you do have 4 full cups, and this is again at a low heat, so it's not going to disappear too quickly. Make sure you're scraping down the sides so that any rice that's stuck to the sides gets put in the mass of rice in the center. You just don't want to end up with grains of rice that have not been cooked. So you need to be stirring it and you need to be scraping it. This is one of the main reasons why I use a spatula if I'm doing something like this, or cooking in general. It just makes moving the food around very easily, as well as if you have to do something that does involve scraping. You don't have to worry about scratching with a metal utensil, or if you're using a wood utensil, you don't have to worry about it not conforming to the sides of the pan, making it hard to actually get everything down and incorporated. So I'm almost at the end of the broth. I've tasted the rice, and it's like just a little bit al dente, I guess, which I believe is the traditional kind of texture that you're looking for with risotto. I do not really like al dente rice. That's not really my thing. So I'm going to let it keep cooking. I still have probably a half cup of broth left, but we're nearing the end. As you can see, the rice has expanded a lot. It's probably about a third of the Dutch oven full now, whereas before it was much smaller, so it's absorbed most of that nice liquid, and along with that liquid you're getting a lot of flavor from the broth. Alright, so I'm going to pour in the last bit of the broth that's in the pot. It's nearly empty, so I'm just going to pour it right from the pot. And that's the last of our broth. So I'm going to let this cook down, probably about 30 seconds to a minute, and then I'm going to turn off the heat and we're going to add back in the mushrooms and the rest of the ingredients. So now that most of the water has been absorbed completely, we're going to add back in the mushrooms. Once those are in, give it a stir and turn off the heat. So the first thing we're going to add is our tablespoon of butter. I use the Earth Balance soy-free vegan butter. Personally, it's really good. I've had no issues with that. So we're going to add a tablespoon. Again, I'm not really measuring. You can if you want to. It's put in however much you feel is nice. Adjust and taste and adjust, and you're fine. The final thing we're going to add is either Parmesan as per the recipe, or in my case the Daya cheddar, and I like the cutting board shreds. Usually I use the block for this, but I mean, this is what I have open, so this is what I'm going to use, and we need about a 1/4 cup of that. Something like that looks okay. And then we're going to stir it up, and hopefully that will melt the cheese and melt the butter. Alright, so it looks like the butter and the cheese is pretty well incorporated. So the very last thing that we have to add is salt and pepper. I'm not going to add salt just because I don't really like my food salty, and the butter is salted, but we are going to add pepper. You're not looking for tons of pepper, but you do want enough so that there is pepper in every bite. At this point you can add extra salt and pepper if you would like, or you can top it with the Parmesan if you use Parmesan, or even the Daya, it doesn't really matter. As you can see, I put it in my little sloth mug, which is super cute. Kind of looks like brains. And we're going to taste test this. It is so good. So good. The rice is nice. The leeks are good. I've never even used leeks prior to this recipe. And now I make sure that they're on the grocery list at least semi-often because I want to make this because it's so tasty. I would give this probably like a 9 out of 10. I think I needed a little bit more vegetable broth this time just for some added flavor, or maybe I will add a little bit of salt just to boost the flavors a little bit. But overall, it's really good. I hope you enjoyed this cook with me, and if you feel like it, like and subscribe. If you don't, that's cool too. And I'll see you guys again. Bye!